Welcome to the Daily News Currents. Today is Monday, October 13th, and for today's headlines we have Inside the TikTok documents, stripping teens and boosting attractive people. Man with guns arrested near Trump rally in Coachella, sheriff says. Biden calls for bipartisan effort to help areas hit by storms. SpaceX advances Starship program with a launch and catch. Why Saturday Night Live and the unappreciated influence of Carol Burnett. Inside the TikTok documents, stripping teens and boosting attractive people. Kids as young as 15 were stripping on TikTok's live feature, fueled by adults who were paying for it. That's what TikTok learned when it launched an internal investigation after a report on Forbes. Officials at TikTok discovered there was a high number of underage streamers receiving a gift or coin in exchange for stripping, real money converted into a digital currency, often in the form of a plush toy or a flower. This is one of the several disturbing accounts that came to light in a trove of secret documents reviewed last week by NPR and Kentucky Public Radio. Even more troubling was that TikTok executives were acutely aware of the potential harm the app can cause teens, but appeared unconcerned. The information came after more than a 2-year investigation into TikTok by 14 attorneys general that led to state officials suing the company on Tuesday. Here are a few more of the most serious and previously unreported allegations against TikTok, the wildly popular app that is used by around 170 million people in the US. You can be addicted in under 35 minutes or 260 videos. TikTok quantified the precise amount of viewing it takes for someone to form a habit, 260 videos. Kentucky authorities note that while it might seem a lot, TikTok videos can be just a few seconds long. Thus, in under 35 minutes, an average user is likely to become addicted to the platform, the state investigators concluded. TikTok algorithm prioritizes beautiful people. While TikTok's main video feed saw a high volume of not attractive subjects filling everyone's screen, the app rejiggered its algorithm to amplify users the company viewed as beautiful, according to the internal report viewed by Kentucky's investigators. In fact, TikTok's documents showed it went so far as to tweak its algorithm to reduce the visibility of people it deemed not very attractive, and took active steps to promote a narrow beauty norm, even though it could negatively impact their young users, the Kentucky authorities wrote in the previous redacted documents. Limits on TikTok use barely had an impact. The applet's parents set a time limit on their kids' usage from a range from 40 minutes to 2 hours per day. TikTok even created a tool that set the default time prompt at 60 minutes per day to combat excessive and compulsive use of the social media app. After test, TikTok found that the tool had little impact, accounting for just about a minute and a half drop in usage from around 108.5 minutes per day to 107 minutes with the tool. According to the complaint, TikTok did not revisit this issue. The document shows one TikTok project manager speaking candidly about the time limit feature real goal, improving public trust in the TikTok platform via media coverage, the TikTok employee said. Our goal is not to reduce the time spent. 95% of smartphone users under 17 use TikTok. The presentation shows that top company officials reveal that an estimated 95% of smartphone users under 17 use TikTok at least once a month. This led a company staffer to state it had hit a ceiling among young users. TikTok viewed itself as being in an arms race for attention, according to a 2021 internal presentation. An internal document about users under 13 instructed moderators to not take action on reports on underage users unless their bio specifically states they are 13 or younger. Under federal law, social media companies cannot collect data on children under 13 unless the companies have explicit consent from parents. Compulsively using TikTok interferes with kids' normal lives. The documents show that TikTok was aware that it interferes with the essential personal responsibilities like sufficient sleep, school responsibilities, and connecting with loved ones. One unnamed TikTok executive put it in stark terms, saying that the reason kids watch TikTok is because the power of the app's algorithm keeps them from sleeping and eating and moving around the room and looking at someone in the eyes. Response from TikTok senators and a watchdog group. On Thursday, TikTok spokesman Alex Herrick criticized NPR for reporting on information that is now under a court seal, claiming the material picks misleading quotes and takes outdated documents out of context to misrepresent our commitment to community safety. Some algorithm groups, however, welcomed the disclosures. The Oversight Project, a social media watchdog group, said that TikTok has not been honest about how safe children are on the app. These unredacted documents prove that TikTok knows exactly what it's doing to our kids, and the rot goes all the way to the top, the group wrote on X. Also on Friday, a bipartisan pair of senators, Richard Blumenthal and Marsha Blackburn, wrote a letter to TikTok asking the company to turn over all documents and information related to disclosures about child safety on the app, citing NPR's report. Man with gun arrested near Trump rally in Coachella, sheriff says. A man was arrested near the former President Donald Trump rally in Coachella, California on Saturday and charged with illegal possession of a loaded firearm and high-capacity magazine, according to the Riverside County Sheriff's Department on Sunday. Sheriff deputies found a shotgun, a loaded handgun, and a high-capacity magazine inside a car of a 49-year-old Them Miller. The Las Vegas resident was stopped and taken into custody at a checkpoint near Trump's rally. Deputies charged Miller for illegal possession of a loaded firearm and possession of a high-capacity magazine. He was then booked at the John J. Benoit Detention Center. The incident did not impact the safety of former President Trump or attendees of the event, Riverside County Sergeant Ben Medina said in a statement. No other information was provided about Miller or the incident. Biden calls for a bipartisan effort to help areas hit by storms. The president surveyed damage in Florida and announced $612 million for projects to help the electric grid in areas affected by Hurricane Helene and Milton. Standing in front of one of the many houses wrecked by Hurricane Milton in Florida, President Biden said on Sunday that the storm was devastating for those who lost homes, businesses, or relatives, even as he expressed relief that the storm was not as destructive as anticipated. Thankfully, the storm's impact was not as cataclysmic as they predicted, Mr. Biden said in St. Pete Beach. For some individuals, it was cataclysmic, but only for those individuals who lost their homes. But more importantly, those folks who lost their lives, lost family members, lost all their personal belongings, entire neighborhoods were flooded, and millions without power. Earlier, he surveyed the damage from the air, the shredded roof of the Tropicana Field baseball stadium, mounds of debris lighting roads, and messages spray-painted on furniture piled outside of homes. One message read, Mayor, Governor, Mr. Prez, small businesses need help too. Another simply said, help us. Homeowners have taken a real beating in these back-to-back storms, Mr. Biden said, referring to Milton and Hurricane Helene, and they're heartbroken and exhausted, and their expenses are piling up. Mr. Biden's visit to the hurricane-ravaged communities in Florida, his second such trip in 2 weeks, came as he has been managing various crises, including multiple natural disasters in the final stretch of his presidency. He used the visit to announce a $612 million for 6 Energy Department projects in areas hit by Milton and Helene to improve the region's electric grid, including nearly $100 million for Florida. On Friday, he declared a major disaster for Florida communities affected by Milton. Mr. Biden also used the moment to call for bipartisan collaboration to help the areas affected pick up the pieces. In a sign of such unity, Mr. Biden was greeted by Representative Anna Paulina Luna and Senator Rick Scott, Florida Republicans who are frequent critics of the Biden administration, after the president finished his helicopter tour. We've been in frequent contact. In some moments like this, we come together to take care of each other, not as Democrats or Republicans, but as Americans, Mr. Biden said. Americans who need help, and Americans who help you if you were in the same situation. We are one United States. But there were still signs of partisan division in the final weeks before the election. Even though state leaders have historically met with presidents during their visits to areas recovering from disasters, Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, a Republican, did not meet with Mr. Biden on Sunday. Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary, said Mr. DeSantis did not respond to an invitation to join the president. The Florida governor also did not join Mr. Biden when he surveyed parts of the state affected by Hurricane Helene earlier this month. Before the visit, Mr. Biden had repeatedly admonished former President Donald J. Trump for making false statements about the federal response that have been repeatedly debunked by local, state, and federal authorities in the disaster areas. Mr. Biden has also said he thinks Congress should return from recess to pass additional funding for the Federal Emergency Management Agency. His administration has said the agency has enough resources to respond to the immediate needs, but will require the funding for long-term recovery. Speaker Mike Johnson has said that the passing additional aid can wait until Congress is back in session after the election, and that FEMA should focus on distributing the money that Congress already approved for the agency. FEMA was slow to respond, Mr. Johnson said, despite bipartisan praise of the federal response from many local officials. They did not do the job that we all expect and hope that they will do, and there's going to be a lot of assessment about that, as well in the days ahead. FEMA said it had approved $441 million in assistance for survivors of Hurricane Helene and over $349 million in funding to help rebuild communities. Deanne Criswell, the FEMA administrator, has said that the agency spent $9 billion of the $20 billion that Congress put in the agency's disaster fund this fiscal year. The Small Business Administration has warned it will soon run out of funding to issue loans for homeowners and businesses affected by the storm. Mr. Biden still tried to project optimism before leaving Florida on Sunday. "We're making real progress," he said. "Everybody seems pretty happy with the way it's going. The next thing is to make sure we get money in there for small businesses." SpaceX advances Starship program with a launch and catch. SpaceX achieves its first ever chopsticks landing.
At Capital Group, we believe in the potential energy of fixed income. Our distinctive investing approach has delivered strong long-term results. All you have to do to activate this potential energy is activate us. Capital Group Fixed Income, actively different.
We have liftoff. Stage separation.
Booster coming in hot for booster touch.
Booster running burn shutdown.
Megadilla has popped the booster.
SpaceX pulled off a feat of technical wizardry on Sunday, not only flying a 233-foot rocket booster back to its launch site, but also catching it out of the air with two giant mechanical arms. It occurred during the fifth test flight of the Starship rocket, and it was a huge step forward for the ambitions of SpaceX and its founder Elon Musk, which include one day transporting people to Mars. In the more immediate future, NASA is paying SpaceX $4 billion to use Starship to take astronauts to the surface of the moon during 2 upcoming missions in its Artemis program. Mr. Musk's company, in addition to having built and flown the world's largest and most powerful rocket, has also demonstrated a key technology needed to make the vehicle completely reusable and able to fly again and again, quickly, more like a jetliner than a rocket. Bill Nelson, a NASA administrator, congratulated SpaceX on Sunday's flight in a post on the social media platform X. As we prepare to go back to the moon under Artemis, continued testing will prepare us for the bold missions that lie ahead, including to the South Pole region of the moon, and then on to Mars, he said. At 8:25 a.m. Eastern Time, the rocket, nearly 400 feet tall, lifted off from the SpaceX launch site near Brownsville, Texas. The upper stage Starship vehicle, stacked on top of the first stage, known as a Super Heavy booster, will be capable of carrying more than 100 metric tons to orbit. After the booster successfully pushed Starship upward through the densest part of the atmosphere, it dropped away as Starship continued to head toward space. The booster then ignited a few of its 33 engines to propel itself back to the launch site. As it fell out of the sky at supersonic speeds, it set off sonic booms that astounded spectators but annoyed some residents. My house shook on liftoff and re-entry, all the way in Harlington, 40 miles away, said Juster LeClaire, a wildlife biologist with the Coastal Bend Bays and Estuaries program, which monitors the SpaceX launches. It genuinely felt like a minor earthquake, and I had not known a rocket was launching. Close to the ground, the engines fired again to slow the booster, which looked like a giant falling cigarette with the glow of the engines at the bottom. As the booster descended towards the launch tower, it swung back and forth and flames rose along one side, but that did not seem to knock it off course. It nestled against the arms, which closed gently around the booster, catching it. When the engine switched off, the booster was still hanging in midair. I don't know what to say, Gwynne Shotwell, the chief operating officer at SpaceX, and in a posting on X. A small fire continued to burn at the base of the booster, but the flames soon extinguished. The return of the booster to the launch site was similar to how the first stage of SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket re-enters the atmosphere before landing on a floating platform or a landing pad. SpaceX now does that routinely, but the boosters still have to be brought back to the launch site. Mr. Musk envisions that starships will be able to fly much more often, so SpaceX built a tower with mechanical arms nicknamed chopsticks. SpaceX also plans to use those arms to catch starships when they return from orbit. While the launch tower caught the booster in Texas, the upper stage Starship vehicle continued on in an arc into space towards the Indian Ocean. For this flight, SpaceX improved the thermal protection on Starship so that it could better withstand the searing heat of re-entry. At least one of the flaps looked like it suffered some damage during re-entry, but Starship survived intact as it performed a soft landing on the water. It then exploded, which was not unexpected. SpaceX was not planning to recover the spacecraft. A camera that SpaceX had set up on a buoy in the ocean captured Starship's final moments, and the footage suggested that it landed almost exactly where it was aiming for. While SpaceX commentators remained focused on the mission Sunday, the test flight occurred as Mr. Musk invested his time and money in supporting the campaign of former President Donald J. Trump. He appeared beside Mr. Trump at a rally this month in Butler, Pennsylvania, wearing a shirt that says Occupy Mars, and has asserted that Mr. Trump is the only candidate who will get humanity to Mars. To get to Mars, or to even land on the moon, SpaceX has more technical challenges to master. They include speeding up the pace of launches and demonstrating the ability to refill Starship's propellant tanks while in orbit. Mr. Musk is promising that the first Starship to Mars will depart in late 2026, the next time that Earth and Mars line up, and that if those initial landings go well, crewed flights will follow. The sonic booms, which the Federal Aviation Administration had predicted when granting SpaceX permission to launch, could add another issue of contention among the agency. SpaceX environmentalists who say that not enough is being done to protect people, property, and wildlife from the launches. Those complaints could grow as SpaceX is seeking permission to increase the number of Starship launches at its Texas site from 5 orbital launches a year to 25. But SpaceX says regulators were hindering its progress, with this 5th flight test of Starship delayed for months by bureaucratic sluggishness. The FAA says it's working to protect public safety. At one point, the agency said it would not approve Sunday's flight until late November, with a sign-off from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on environmental issues at the Texas launch site a factor in the delay. There has been widespread evidence of environmental consequences to the region, as detailed in a New York Times investigation published in July. After weeks of pressure by Mr. Musk, FAA approval came Saturday for the flight on Sunday, but some environmental caveats were attached. The FAA said SpaceX had agreed to conduct studies of pea-sized gravel the rocket sends into the adjacent state park to determine the distance of the gravel plume and methods for protecting nests during launch events. SpaceX will also use drones with infrared cameras, which can detect animal nesting sites during launches, and will deploy environmental engineers before and after the launches to look for any harm to these birds and their nest. The company may also be asked, if the Fish and Wildlife Service approves, to install temporary shelters to protect the nests during the launches. In public filings, the FAA has said that the air pressure, noise, and sonic booms all would be more intense during Sunday's test. During earlier flights, the booster descended over the Gulf of Mexico, much farther from homes. The air pressure, the FAA said in a report made public Saturday, would be nearly strong enough to potentially cause minor damage to older plaster on homes not far from the launch site. Planned post-flight inspections will show if the event caused any damage. If so, how widespread was it? SpaceX, the FAA said, has insurance to cover the cost of any required structural repairs. Valerie Bates, a manager at the Port Isabel Lighthouse State Historic Site, which is about 6 miles from the launch site, said this Sunday flight was notably stronger, at least to her, than earlier launches once the landing was included. The sound during liftoff is always long and rumbling, she said, but the vibrations were more intense as the booster returned. Although there was no apparent damage to the lighthouse, she said some neighbors reported items falling off walls. This was clearly different, she said, adding that she was at the lighthouse for the event. There were 2 or 3 really strong booms at the landing that felt more impactful. It was stronger. It was louder. Not all area residents reported more intense disruptions. Keith Reynolds, who lives 4 miles from the launch site, said the vibrations and noise were not that different to him than they were during previous launches. He did not see any damage to his house. It was an incredible feat, he said. I'm ready for the next one, and 100 more. Why Saturday Night Live and the unappreciated influence of Carol Burnett. A new film about the show does not mention her, but in many ways her hit sketch series helped define an early version of Lorne Michaels. What makes Lorne Michaels laugh? That is no small question. Half a century of aspiring stars have thought hard on it. The answer has launched and stymied many careers while going a long way to define modern comedy. The hagiographic new movie, Saturday Night, focuses on Michaels as he puts together the 1975 premiere episode of Saturday Night Live, but the comedic vision of a man who has gone to oversee the show for decades remains maddeningly, pointedly remote. Played with the determined calm by Gabrielle LaBelle, the young Lorne Michaels comes off as blatantly generic maverick, struggling repeatedly to explain his idea for the show. In an early scene, he compares himself to Thomas Edison, and while one can detect some mocking of the hubris in that statement, there is not enough. To the extent that his sensibility is illuminated in the screenplay by Jason Rittman and Gil Keenan, it's through opposition. In scene after scene, Michaels is the counterculture hero, confronted by a procession of squares, suits, and old-school naysayers. They are not just skeptical executives or scolding censors either. Actors playing Jim Henson, Johnny Carson, and Milton Berle make appearances, in roles designed thematically, at least, to show us everything this hip new show is not. What stands out about this parade of aesthetic antagonists is that perhaps the most important one to the formation of the identity of Saturday Night Live goes unmentioned: Carol Burnett. Despite the sense you get from the cinematic love letter, Saturday Night Live did not invent must-see television sketch comedy. It wasn't even the first important live one on Saturday nights on NBC. That would be Your Show of Shows in the 1950s, with a writer's room that included Mel Brooks, Carl Reiner, and Neil Simon. The dominant sketch comedy, when SNL got started, was The Carol Burnett Show, a CBS staple since the late 1960s that also featured topical satire, flamboyant performances, and star cameos. In books about the creation of Saturday Night Live, the ones the new film screenwriters certainly leaned on, Burnett represented a load of sorts for the artists and shows. Lorne made it clear that Burnett's style encompassed everything. The new show would avoid Doug Hill and Jeff Weingrab wrote in Saturday Night Backstage History of Saturday Night Live, whereas the Carol Burnett Show featured broad performances with actors in Bob Mackie-designed clothes, sometimes breaking character as they tried to hold back laughs. Saturday Night, as the show was known at first, was aimed for a less theatrical, more writerly style with less mugging for the camera. In Live from New York, the oral history by Tom Shales and James Andrew Miller, brainy writers like Al Franklin and Buck Henry say the Carol Burnett Show was shorthand for the kind of slicker stuff they were trying not to do. While saying everyone on SNL respected her, Paul Schaefer, who played in the house band, added that to Carol Burnett was a common way to dismiss an idea. You saw similar hipster derision in earlier press coverage, and a deep dive feature in Rolling Stone from 1976 that spent time with Michaels backstage. A writer contrasted the late night cool of the new show with Burnett's safe professionalism. God forbid, of course, that SN should ever function with the factory precision of, say, Carol Burnett, the story Riley noted. But is the notion of SN's writers starting to write at 10 a.m. Mondays, as Burnett do, really so prostitutional? It's striking to see Burnett discussed this way, because she is now widely and rightly considered one of our funniest and most influential comedy pioneers. Even SNL veterans like Tina Fey and Amy Poehler cite her show as inspiration. Reitman's Saturday Night is unsparing about so many other talented cultural figures. It's worth considering why Burnett's role was omitted. Perhaps the mention of another influential sketch show complicates the movie's clear interest in presenting Michaels, who had many years of writing and producing comedy before Saturday Night Live, as a revolutionary who gave birth to something entirely new. Ignoring the show's rejection of Burnett is also consistent with the larger whitewashing of the sexism of the earlier SNL. One of the few sketches shown in the movie is a feminist one from Rosie Schuster about woman catcalling a construction worker. We see Schuster, who is married to Michaels, praising and gently coaxing John Belushi into wearing a bee costume, but we don't see Belushi expressing the belief that women were not funny, as original cast member Jane Curtin has described. She said he believed that women should not be there. The most generous explanation is that the movie's restraint is itself making an argument about the legacy of Michaels, that what made him successful over generations is precisely that he can come off as somewhat hard to pin down, even a cipher. Having a strong point of view is essential to creating a funny sketch series, but an institution that encompasses many different styles and changes with the times while remaining relevant over decades requires a different skill set. There is also evidence of this approach from him. In a revealing 1979 interview in Rolling Stone, Michael said of the show, "I wanted it to be devoid of definition." Lorne Michaels produced a singularly enduring comedy show that has evolved consistently, changing casts and styles in ways big and small. He's been open to a wide array of sensibilities, from the boyish goofiness of Jimmy Fallon to the acerbic deadpan of Norm MacDonald, from a precision caricatures of Phil Hartman to the grand grueling, spatter humor of Sarah Sherman. Michael's greatest accomplishment is not creating a funny show, but keeping it on air for 5 decades. To pull that off, being flexible might be more essentially quality than having a coherent voice. In fact, Saturday Night Live has over the years artistically moved in the direction of the Carol Burnett show, but not just in terms of a slicker design. The performances on SNL are often broad, too. No one was surprised when Dana Carvey broke character in the cold open last week during his impression of Joe Biden, one of the highlights so far this new season. Asked in 2016 why she has never hosted Saturday Night Live, Burnett, now 91 and still doing dynamic work in shows like Better Call Saul and Palm Royale, told Larry King she has never been asked. The only episode she ever appeared in was towards the end of the period when Michaels had temporarily left the show. In 1985, when the guest host Harry Anderson said goodbye, surrounded by the cast, he pointed at Burnett in the audience, brought her on stage, and described her as one of the reasons we're all in this business. There have been online campaigns to get Michaels to tap her, including a plea from Patton Oswalt and a petition from fans. Nothing has come from it, but Lorne Michaels has a history of changing course, adjusting on the fly. Ask Shane Gillis, who hosted this year after being fired from the cast a few years earlier. SNL should have Burnett host. What better way to celebrate 50 years of an expansive show that began in part of a reaction to Carol Burnett? And that is all that we have today. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.